Today, I want to give you a different perspective of for the forage legumes and using into new opportunities for pollinators and wildlife. So just a disclaimer, these are two areas that I'm starting to work with. So I'm pretty new to it, but I'm super excited, and I would like to share with you today things that I've learned over the past 3 years working on those forage legumes, especially in Florida. Focus is going to be a little bit on species from Florida. And the idea here is diversity. So where's the benefit of diversity of those amazing forages that we have that can take us from our traditional enterprises of monoculture Bahia grass here in Florida or monoculture grasses in many other places into through improved pastures with legumes that can enhance animal production, fix nitrogen, reducing cost of production, and many other ecosystem services into new opportunities. The deer industry in Florida, for example, is a very, very large industry with over 300 farms dedicated to raise genetics for deer and that sell to hunting preserves. And beyond that, there is the wild deer hunting industry, which is also very large here in Florida and moves a lot of seeds because people plant those food plots for the deer. So where does the forage legumes come in the deer world? Well, if we look into the diet preferences, we see that wild-tailed deer compose a good part of their diet from legumes and from browse. Just as a reference with other livestock species is very similar to sheep and goats. So there's all small ruminants that are going to compose great part of their diet from browse and legumes. And why is that? Because those are small ruminants, and because of their small size and high nutrient requirements in relation to the body weight, they really need those nutrient-dense forages. And here's where legumes have a major role. So that small rumen will not accommodate a lot of ruggage, low nutritive value, so it fuels very fast and limits intake. So we need something that is high turnover and that can accommodate for that high feeding rhythm that those small ruminants have. Just as a matter of reference here, we're talking about 4 to 8 pounds of dry matter forage for an adult white-tailed deer per day. And if that forage is mostly composed with low nutritive value, they're not going to be able to harvest the amount of energy required to take through the day. Similar to what my colleague Colin Waters presented on beef cattle nutrition, legumes are very important. Well, nutrition is very important on any animal, and legumes play an important part here in the determination of performance and reproduction of those deer. And for those into the hunting industry, the high protein forages are very important for the antler development. As any animal, good nutrition is the foundation of good health, or animals in the high plane of nutrition are going to be more resistant to diseases. And normally nutritional problems like nutritional deficiencies are one of the most frequent problems that we encounter on deer. Now, going from the wild deer into the pan deer, it's a completely different world here. And a lot of those pan deer are raised on concentrate, especially on the breeding operations, not on the hunting preserve, but on the breeding operations. They're raised on concentrate, and the lack of fiber can cause physiological problems like acidosis. And the legumes come into place where they can bring a lot of quality and also high quality fiber and protein for those animals. Just for us to have an idea of what I'm talking about in terms of nutrient requirements for the white-tailed deer, of course, they don't eat percentage, they eat amount. But here's just to have an idea of what percentage protein on a diet we're looking for those deer. In the growing ones, in the growing fawns, we're between 14 and 20% to have an average to good growth They are developing, they are a higher requirement, they are putting a lot of developing organs, and they need high protein. The yearlings a little less adult on maintenance is going to be low, like any cow. It's going to be lower protein. But when you get on the reproduction side, either in lactation or also during the antler development for the adult males, which leads into the reproduction cycle on rooting, those animals need high quality, high protein level, and that's where legumes again are going to play a major component of their diet here. Okay, to put that in the perspective throughout the year, this is the energy requirement of the doe in terms of total digestible nutrients, considering that they're going to fall on the spring here around April. That's when they have the higher nutrient requirement in terms of energy. And it keeps going down here during the lactation until weaning. Here is the mature animal going to be the least amount of energy required and also protein requirement during this phase here, and picks up during breeding season and early gestation and goes on with the cycle. Now, if we're talking about the doe, if we think about a buck, here during this part here, when antlers start growing, that's when we need more protein for those bucks that are getting into the rooting season. Okay, how can we overlay our forage production here in Florida? It's a very general curve here I'm going to present, but just to have an idea of how the forage production overlays with this. And we have warm season annuals. We have some perennials, warm season perennials here in perennial peanut during the summer. Most of our warm season perennial grasses are not going to be very desirable for the deer because of what I explained in terms of nutrient density. But then towards the winter, we have small grains, brassicas, and big-seeded legumes. Big-seeded meaning the peas, hairy vetch, and other fast-growing legumes, and then followed by ryegrass and clovers, also very high in nutrient. Just to have an idea here. So with this chart in mind, we need is the same thing we do for cattle. We're trying to maximize the forage available for those animals and also match when they are needing the most quality, when we can offer the best quality forage around. One trick here with annual season legumes is that we can plant them a little bit later and make that curve go to the later part of the summer into the fall, and we have good forage for them throughout the antler development period for the males. Just as the reference here, several legume species like perennial peanut, between 14 to 21% crude protein and 65 to 70 something digestibility. We go for the clovers, we're also between the 15 and 22. Then we go for sun hemp and some of the other summer legumes, especially when they are focusing on grazing the leaves. So they are very selective browsers, not grazers actually. So we're going to select very, very high quality material that they can find on those sun hemp leaves. And we've done some analysis, some nutritive value analysis, and it's kind of surprising what they are selecting in terms of quality. They really know what they're getting into. Just to have an idea, this is what we're looking into, a food plot in one of our deer farms here in North Florida. It's a pasture we planted for them with sun hemp, cowpeas, pyramidal, velvet beans, and buckwheat. And why did I choose that mixture? There's a very logical reason. Other than the buckwheat, it didn't fit too well, but was an early forage here, not a legume. Sun hemp and pearl millet are more upright growth, where cowpeas and velvet beans are more viney in prostrate growth. So they don't compete for niche, and they complement each other, making this very, very dense canopy. When we think about sun hemp and the millet in that tall canopy, we're not only providing feed, but we're also providing habitat for the deer. So they feel more protected, they change their grazing behavior, they have lower stress. Now, just a disclaimer here, those are all field observations that we have with our partner, with our deer farm partner that observed that. We don't have scientific proof of that, but it's something that we're looking into a new project we're developing this summer with my colleagues from Wildlife. Another thing about sun hemp, and many other forage legumes like crimson clover, not crimson clover, like birchwood trefoil, is that they have condensed tannins, and those can act as anthelmintics, or they suppress gastrointestinal nematodes. So it's very good for parasite management for the deer. Many other species of legumes we can grow in Florida: Alice clover, ash domini, especially, or deer vetch, especially on the more on the wetter areas. Hairy indigo, forage soybeans, tartan desmodium, lab, and many other things that we can grow here. Really, to choose, really need to know what type of area you have and what grows better in that area. And one of my favorites, and I think is not only my favorite, but probably several of the people that talk on this conference presented perennial peanut. It's an excellent pasture, an excellent hay. People from hunting preserves like it because it offers great forage, and also it's open. So it's easier to hunt and to see the animals and to find the animals after shooting. They don't offer a visual barrier, and it's very attractive. In terms of hay, I had a picture cutting Alice clover hay, and I'm talking about perennial peanut hay for the deer breeding operations that are mostly focused on concentrate feeding. Perennial peanut hay or alfalfa hay or other legume hays are also a great source of feed that can counteract a little bit of the effect of the concentrate on the rumen and avoid those problems with acidosis that I had mentioned before. Then we can look into the winter. And on the top part of my slides, I have the legumes. On the bottom part of my slides, I have other things like small grains, chicory, and turnips. Those are very good forages to complement the legumes, especially because some of them are slow growing, like the clovers are not going to be very fast growing. So you want to get some of the mixtures to have early growth, early forage, early in the winter, and then into the spring with the clovers. Winter pea and vetch, both common vetch and hairy vetch, are a little faster growing, and you can have forage earlier on in the winter. Very high quality, very high production on those species, and the deer absolutely love them. Okay, let's move on to pollinators. That's my other project that I'm starting now. We're looking into pollinators, into restructuring habitats, so recreating habitats into solar farms using forages that are attractive for pollinators, and a lot of those are legumes because also they do not require a lot. They do not require a lot of fertilizer in terms of nitrogen, of course, to maintain, and that's one of the requirements for those spore plants. The value of pollinators go way beyond honey production. We always think about honey production. Many of our cattlemen have some either some hives or they work with the beekeepers to have some hives on the property to have honey. But the big deal is actually pollination. There's over 100 crops that depend on insect pollination, and that is an estimated value between $18 to $27 billion in the United States. A lot of money that goes into pollinators. Many crops here in Florida and all over the place depend on bees, and our bees go from anywhere from South Florida all the way to California. They start with watermelons and cucumbers and go all the way to the almonds in California. Big market for that. So maintaining those hives is also opportunity for producing legumes here. Just as a matter of reference, there is over 320 species of bees in Florida and 4,000 bees in the United States, and they come in all sorts of sizes, colors, and shapes. And that determines a lot on how they use the flowers. And the interesting thing is that many of the forages that we consider forages for our cattle, or in my case here presenting before for wildlife, are also good forages for the bees. Different bees, again, like different forages. So a few of them are better for different types of species. For example, Dr. Garcia, a former PhD student, Dr. Dubé's group, showed that improving pastures for cattle, adding legumes there can also have improved habitat for bees, not only honeybees, but especially native bees that we can see here, especially when we have the flowering from the perennial peanut during the summer. But the interesting thing here is that when you have a grass legume mixture, you can enhance the amount of bees. But not only a grass legume mixture, period, but grass legumes mixtures that they can offer diversity of flowers and different phenology to favor different types of bees in different parts of the year. One of the things I'm putting together right now, and there is a lot of information missing here. There's a lot of gaps of information that we're going to be looking into with our project. What for resources in our common legumes are good for bees, both honeybees and native bees here in the state of Florida. So there's many things we can grow. Some have greater value than other for bees. So it's interesting, like for example, cowpea can produce a large amount of pollen nectar, and some papers show that it's highly desirable for both native and honeybees. Same thing for our white clover here, high potential. Our perennial peanut has only moderate potential for our native bees, but also it takes care of a niche that we have there. The other thing is not only producing nectar and producing pollen, but we also are interested in when it blooms, because when we arrange our forage mix for pollinators, we want that diversity of species to extend that blooming, the flowering period as much as we can. And of course, not all flowers attract all bees. There's differences in nectar and pollen production. There's different requirements from the different bees. Flower morphology and time of opening changes a lot depending on the species and also on cultivars, on varieties. And bees of varying size and tongue lengths are going to prefer different types of plants. Some forages need cross-pollination, while others do not need. And also the length of the flowering period and flowering abundance, as I mentioned before, are very important. Here, I bring an example of a specialized pollinators. This Achinomenia amorphoides from Mexico is not our Achinomenia americana, but it's interesting that it has a very specific insect that has a size and shape just perfect to pollinate that specific flower. So it's very, very specific pollinator. When we look into different varieties, this is another work in the southern part of the United States, looking in cowpea varieties and the number of pollinator visits, we see a huge difference between varieties here, not only between different varieties, but also throughout the flowering period. And this is also related to the length, not only to the length of flowering, but to the determinate or indeterminate type of growth of those individual varieties. One thing that was kind of sad when I was looking at it, that's one of our most common cowpeas, iron and clay, was very low in terms of number of pollinator visits. But there is other cowpeas available in the market, like Red Reaper and a new one from Texas called Ace that we're going to be looking at, that probably have better potential for pollinators. So again, choosing the right variety is important. What about grazing management? Again, another important factor, because if you have this beautiful clover pasture with ryegrass and some small grains in the middle, and you graze to the ground, you are extinguishing all floral resources there. So you cannot overgraze those pastures. So a regular amount of grazing that can open the canopy for more flowers and more bees, but not excessive grazing where you are eliminating those flowers, is ideal. Changing gears a little bit, when choosing the legumes, invasiveness potential is something very important to consider. Different states and different countries have different lists of invasive species that should be avoided, and some are also forbidden. These are two examples here of highly invasives, like the Lucina and the Mimosa here in Florida. So those are not recommended. There is access to some of those species by our producers, and I've been getting questions from goats and sheep producers about some of those species that are higher risk of invasiveness. So our recommendation is always do not plant there. If you're in doubt, consult your local extension agent, consult your extension system, in terms of invasive species, and see if that species you want to plant is listed there or not. It can be a headache at the end. Well, we talked about how those legumes, and now is very interesting, but we need to establish, and I cannot get it right. And this is actually one of my plantings. So you see that even the specialists fail, and we're not above anybody here. So we make mistakes. I think we learned a lot from Dr. Q's presentation, first presentation in terms of legume establishment and why we fail in planting legumes. I'm going to re-emphasize some of the points he made here. Key points for designing your forage plan for pollinators and wildlife starts with your target species. Now we're going to talk from both sides: your target animal species or pollinator species that you're going to feed, and it's going to determine what you can use, and then your region, your soil, your environmental conditions are going to determine what can you grow. It's always important, again, to have diversity, different flowering capacity, different flower length, different forage production. And don't just go ahead and go to the hunting store and buy the one bag of seeds that has the nice buck on the label. That's not going to work. Look for what's adapted to your region. This is an example label from a seed bag from a store here in Gainesville. So we're pretty south. And you can look that they are selling this Sutter mix with Pensacola, brown top millet, perennial ryegrass, which is very interesting because I have not even seen perennial ryegrass. I think Peter can talk about perennial ryegrass in Oregon, but not much here. We have annual ryegrass. We have Kentucky 32, Towfaster, Bermuda grass, and crimson clover. We only don't have things that don't grow here, but we have things that grow in different seasons. So we go there and buy that and try to plant, and then you are upset that half of the stuff didn't grow. Of course it didn't grow. It was not meant to grow. It's off season or not adapted to here. So talk to your local folks, talk to your local seed stores, not just a regular hunting store, not just a feed store, but talk to your local seed stores and see if they have adapted mixes that you can use for your wildlife or for your pollinators. And also check what recommended varieties for a region. The IFAS has the recommendation for cool season forages and for wildlife food plots in North Florida. And you can consult your extension agent or access our IFAS website, Ask IFAS. And you can find more information. We update those every year. Another point, good soil preparation, weed control, liming and fertilization is the start of any good pasture. Don't wait for the last minute to think about establishing a food plot and in the middle of the woods that you've never done anything and you just want to establish for the next season. You need to take soil samples, you need to prepare it, see if that pH is good. Legumes is very sensitive to pH. Bacteria is very sensitive to pH. You want to raise it. Do some good weed control because some of those legumes are slow growing. You don't want weed competition. And also fertilize it. Give a good condition for those pastures to grow. There's many ways to establish. We have a very good document on planting forages on establishment seedbeds in our IFAS. Also, we can look for it. Not always need some fancy equipment like a no-till plane. Some people use conservation. Thank you, Jennifer, for sending this picture. But you can also broadcast. Interesting thing, when you're broadcasting, make sure the seeds you are using, the species you are using are adapted to broadcasting. And if you're broadcasting, make sure you're also running a light disc over it and compacting it so you have good seed to soil contact. And again, give the pasture good conditions, give the plants good conditions to succeed. And one of the most important things also to give them conditions to succeed is let them grow before you graze. You're not going to be able to establish much if you don't exclude. Deer are avid browsers. They're going to find your food plots very fast. If you don't fence it off, they're going to graze it to the ground and you're going to have nothing. This is a very simple design for an exclusion fence. It's an offset. You can see they are offset. There's basically two fences, a taller fence here, a shorter fence here with electric fence charger, battery powered, pretty simple, quite inexpensive. a little more expensive nowadays with price of lumber, but you're not going to be frustrated at the time you get back to your food plots and everything is grazed down to the ground and you don't have anything. This was an experiment where a demonstration where we had outside animals had access to the plots, and inside they were excluded, and we only gave access to them later. And you can guess how much forage we had here versus here at the end of the season. Well, I probably have more questions than answers for you, so I hope you thought that this presentation was interesting. There's a lot of new research coming up, so keep an eye on our channels, keep in touch with us, our Facebook, UF Forage Team, or our Instagram at UF Forages, or send us an email on forages@ifas.ufl.edu. And we'll love to hear more about your interests in legumes for wildlife and pollinators. Thank you.
All right, we have some questions for you. What is the seed availability and seed cost for sun hemp in the Southeast?
Seed availability is pretty good. We just got several bags of sun hemp. I cannot tell you the price because actually, thank you for Seedway was sponsoring one of our projects. I didn't have a bill for that one, but it's availability is there. You need to contact a local seed dealer to check about availability. There is not that many cultivars available. The one we've been using and that's proven better here suited is the Crescent Sun.
All right, it's very common to mix clovers and oats for cool season mix for deer, but what's the best annual grass legume mix for warm season food plots in our region?
Wow, warm season. I really like sun hemp. What I saw with sun hemp, the deer graze cowpea pretty good. And whoever has a garden and don't have it fenced out, like my garden was not fenced out here, the beans are just germinated and they are going to get. So soybeans, cowpeas, and sun hemp are great. I like putting some millet in the mixture because they do graze that millet and offer some structure to the cowpea and to other beans if you put to go up. So that picture I showed before, sun hemp, cowpea, per millet, and velvet beans, a little more complicated to get velvet bean, but is also good. That makes a good mixture. Now, if you're in a wet area, you're probably not going to be successful. Then one of your few options is going to be ashnominy. Really depends. The best mix really depends on where you are, what type of soil you have.
All right, thank you. Next question. Which legume flowers are best for honey production?
That's a very good question. I don't have the answer for that. From our research, white clover is one of the highest, the most named legume for honey production. Now, one thing that I thought interesting, Dr. Q, and you can correct me if I'm wrong because I have not done a complete search of the literature, is that red clover has some questionable preference for bees.
You are correct. Not for bees, but for honeybees.
For honeybees.
Yes. Red clover has a stronger tripping mechanism and a larger flower, and you'll see more. I mean, honeybees will certainly work red clover, but the wild bees are more involved with red clover pollination many times, and the white clover is the preferred. And when you go to alfalfa, honeybees will just about not pollinate alfalfa. You've got to get leafcutter bees or something like that. Alfalfa has such a stronger flower tripping mechanism that honeybees will tend to just avoid it.
Yeah, I was surprised about the cowpeas because some of the work we've seen, again, large variability in cowpeas. Yep. And Dr. Rios has been working on cowpeas, and he showed me some of his trials there. It's fantastic, the genetic variability on that. But it has some interesting results on cowpeas for for attraction for bees in general.
All right, next question here. Is there a pollinator mix of forage legume seed that is commercially available?
I haven't come across any pollinator mix of forage legumes. I'm not sure. There is a lot of pollinator mixes of wildflowers. Now, the wildflowers, the interesting part of the wildflowers is that most of them are planted in the fall, so they're winter spring flowers. So there is a great potential for us to find some other plants that can offer some forage legumes that can offer late fall or mid to late fall and early winter resource for those bees, which is the time of the year here in Florida when the bees are most needing because of lack of natural resources.
All right, thank you. Is there a legume planting guide for the southeastern legumes that could be used to develop bee pasture blends?
There is some information that I found, especially from the University of Georgia. They had a guide. Hopefully we can develop an EDIS publication soon once we develop those projects here and have a better understanding of how the legumes behave here in Florida in our conditions. But yeah, for Alabama has some documents, and also Florida, Georgia has some documents. Now, for those interested in honeybee production, we had a large amount of resources here in our bee lab. Jamie Ellis is our state specialist for bee production, for honeybee production, and also Rachel Mellinger, which is one of my colleagues, Dr. Mellinger, that I'm working on. She works in native bees, so they are a wealth of knowledge on that. So it's a big team working. I'll be excited to come back to this conference in a few years to provide some of our results for Florida.
All right, thank you. Next question. Since deer rut in Northwest Florida is later than much of Florida, January and February, and fawning is in late summer, where summer legumes be useful for fawning and antler development?
Definitely so. So the same principle applies, and the same principle applies for cattle, for sheep, or anything. When is your reproduction cycle? And try to see how you can match that reproduction cycle, knowing when the animals are going to need more, have higher nutritive requirements, and match your forage production on that calendar. So you have to choose the forages that are going to grow or going to provide the most amount of nutrients, not only concentration, just the amount too, because you need mass, you need biomass there during those phases of higher need.
All right, last question that we have in the box here is adding inoculants with legumes at planting used to be really challenging. Now most of the seed comes mixed with a coating. Is this coating of inoculant adequate, or should you still add inoculant?
That's a good question, Dogan, something that we've been discussing a lot. My experience with coated seeds has been very variable here. We do plant legumes every year. We do get fresh seeds. Sometimes we get fresh seeds that are not as fresh, and it's very variable. Bacteria are very sensitive. The rhizobia and the legumes are very, very sensitive organisms to desiccation, and they don't have a long shelf storage. So I am of the school that you should always inoculate. It's a very inexpensive thing to do. It's a very easy thing to do. It's not complicated. Okay. Unless you're, and even if you're planting large areas, you can prepare some seed. Most of the folks here are talking about is small, is not planting a large area. So it's get a pouch of inoculant, prepare the seeds and get them planted. It's a very cheap insurance. I believe some of the higher end crops like alfalfa and some of the clovers have higher quality on those pre-inoculation and higher standards, but some other species I have seen very mixed results and not a lot of inoculation. So I'm always worried about that. It's something that I'd like to investigate a little further, but I always recommend to inoculate. Several legumes are some specific, you need specific inoculants. Some are more promiscuous, so they will inoculate with bacteria that are present in the environment. And many times we just go ahead and do not inoculate, just count on those native bacteria. One detail, same thing as we do with plant breeding. We select plants that perform best. Same thing we can do with bacteria. We can select bacteria that are going to be more efficient in inoculating and producing nitrogen. Many times the ones that you have in the soil are not as adequate. They are going to inoculate, but they are not as adequate as the one you can get from that inoculant. So cheap, normally is not much more than $6 or $8 per bag. You can inoculate at least a bag of seeds. So just get it done.
I have one comment. Marcelo made the comment about Ashenominy, and he's directly on target there. If you're going to try to use Ashenominy as a wildlife attractant, you've got to pick the soil. So that's exactly right. But if you're on a wet flatwood site, my impression has been that Ashenominy is probably the best deer attractant around.
For those that like the eating part of the hunting, which includes me, because I really love eating and grilling, y'all know me. The fattest deer I've ever seen, or the fattest group of deer I've ever seen and harvested, was on perennial peanut fields with a beautiful yellow grease over it. It was amazing. So you can really get them in a great condition on perennial peanut.
Mm-hmm.
If you have questions, if you're not sure about some of the information you heard or how it might be useful for your land or your farm or your hunting preserve or whatever your operation is, contact your local agent, whatever state you're in, and we'll try to get you connected with the people that have the best information.